What is going on, Marking?
How you doing, my friend?
Good, man. We got a question from one of our listeners. And the
Mm-hmm.
question was, or it's regarding our podcast that was on intentions and expectations.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And her question was, where did those expectations come from? Why did our parents put those expectations on us?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially the perspective was of people of color,
People of
right?
colors, Filipinos.
Filipinos. It's a great question. Getting a deeper understanding of where these expectations come from our parents, more specifically in the Filipino community, because it is pretty rampant. Um, I've thought about it a lot. It's my own personal hypothesis, and I think you can draw a line to where these expectations may come from. For me, it's it can date back as far as colonial times, when the Spanish first landed in the Philippines, right?
Mhm.
The idea of an authority figure coming into a tribal nation and imposing an ideology like Christianity and saying, if you do not convert to our ways, then you're either going to die or go to hell, or you're going to go to hell or die. That's the model that was imposed on us. So that's our ideal of success. That was
And that,
it.
just to add to that, that
Mhm.
was over 400 years
That was over
being
400.
colonized.
Yeah, so being ingrained into us. So as we evolved as a nation in the Philippines, the our model of trying to run a household evolved into do what I say,
Mhm.
or else you will suffer the consequences. That was the head of the household's mode of operation.
So I'm going to jump forward. So
Mm-hmm.
basically, now those expectations of being the Fab Four, like you get to choose out of the four: nurse, doctor, attorney, engineer.
Mm-hmm.
Those are like the four things I've always heard.
Mm-hmm.
Like these are the four things that will make you happy and successful in America.
Mm-hmm.
So those four things did come from the Philippines, and then our parents brought that here. Would you say
I,
that's correct?
for me, it starts as early as the Spanish colonization. There's a lot of influence from the American colonization that took place, because that idea of authority figure, do what I say, otherwise you're going to suffer the consequences or die. Like that accompanied with American values of what we saw to be successful is you have to be in power to be successful. A lot of those people who are in power were doctors, lawyers, engineers, in the medical field. Uh, so the mode of operation for people in the Philippines, if I work hard enough, maybe I can get my kid into these schools to become a doctor, lawyer, engineer. And that translated to doing that in the Philippines, and then to maybe our parents and our grandparents really becoming more successful and creating that opportunity for themselves in the United States so that their kids can go to these schools. The better you do, the more successful you are, and there's a whole keeping up with the Joneses and all of that gets exasperated. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And becomes a point of being braggadocious about your kids. And
I've heard that a lot. Yeah.
because when our parents gloat about that stuff, it's a another way of saying, oh, hey, look at me, look at how successful I am, look at my kids. You know what I mean?
Yeah. You hear that a lot. Yeah.
And a lot of Filipinos want that, because we're a poor nation. So when you're successful, it's just like, this it's great. You finally made it
Yeah.
out. But the disparity between what is, the rich and poor in the Philippines is so the gap is so wide. So it really it really almost adds fuel to that fire and keeping up with the Joneses and placing expectations like, well, you got to do this for the family. You got to make sure that we don't, because they don't forget what being poor is like.
Definitely, man.
you
Definitely.
know.
Those expectations were brought down like in history generations from our parents.
Again, this is just from my humble research and my own theory on
You could say it, man. Your experience.
yeah, these are based on my experience for sure, and me doing my own personal research and doing my own critical thinking around it. There's a lot of, I feel there's a lot of other components that add to that expectation. And I also feel like there's a strong presence with the colonizers and how we as the Filipino community held that for ourselves,
Yeah.
and it dictated how we would operate in the world. The other point I'll say to all that, it's neither right or wrong, because our parents only knew, our grandparents only knew what they knew. So these patterns were not like, they weren't passed down. These are generational patterns that are passed down, but they weren't conscious about what it is that they were passing down.
Yeah.
They were just operating from a place of, I need to make sure that my family is set up. So this is what I'm going to tell them to do in order to be successful. It's their way of ensuring that their kids are going to be safe. At the end of the day, it's all coming out of love, but sometimes that coming out of love, you may not understand the fallout that may happen from all of that. In other words, when you're placing high expectations, it's just something to be aware about where these high expectations are coming from. Once you understand where they're coming from, now you can make a new choice. Do I want to continue with some of these generational patterns of high expectations, or do I want to work from a different perspective and be more intentional in my ways of being, as opposed to living in a way of placing expectations on myself or on others, or or having to deal with expectations in those different ways that we discussed in the previous episodes.
Got it. So our parents, grandparents, great grandparents, great grandparents were colonized for over 400 years by the Spaniards, by Spain. And those expectations were definitely placed on our people. And then basically the generational patterns kind of went through
its whole evolution.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I mean, I just basically, pointed out for myself where I think the starting point was, and the middle point of it is, and where we are now. But there's a whole lot of information in there that we didn't cover, or we could talk about or talk to. But at the end of the day, I feel like a lot of these high expectations evolved from that.
And also the Americans also occupied the Philippines for a long time, decades.
Yeah. And, and the history goes back and forth there, because at the end of the day, the Americans, even though they were colonizers and we wanted our independence, they were able to still save us from the Japanese who were occupying us at the time. So they were on that hero status. Yay, America's number one. We got to do what America does to be successful and be the protectors of the world. And society and TV and social media, or we didn't really have social media back then as far as internet is concerned, but news travels in the world at a much slower pace back then. But news of what success looked like was definitely passed on and influenced in the Filipino community.
I mean, it's also interesting from parents who didn't go to school. They only went through 8th grade or high school in the Philippines, and then they're imposing these high expectations on you because they want us to be successful in America.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then you can see, that success, how that also influences keeping up with the Joneses.
Got it. All right. I think we answered the question, man.
Yeah, I think it is a great question. Thank you so much for that question. And I'm definitely looking forward to more of these questions. I think it's awesome.
Yeah. Keep the questions coming in.
Yeah, let's do that.
Thank you for listening to the Artistry in Life podcast. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe.